All right, welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works, right? We take those sources you've been looking at and try to pull out the really, really important stuff. Today, though, it's going to be a little different, because of your background in philosophy and
Oh, yeah.
you're always looking for deeper meaning. So today we're going to dive deep into Zhu Xi. And from what I'm reading here in this Stanford Encyclopedia philosophy entry you sent me, they say that his impact is second only to Confucius in Chinese philosophy.
Wow.
Right.
That's quite a statement, isn't it? And the source actually goes on to say that his philosophical acumen rivals that of Zhuangzi.
Really?
Yeah. So, we're not just talking about some historical figure here. This is a first-rate philosophical system developed by, a master of Neo-Confucianism in the Southern Song Dynasty.
Ooh, okay.
And our goal today is to really unpack those main ideas, put them into context, and really see how they relate to, a philosophical mind like yours.
Okay. So this Stanford Encyclopedia entry you sent, that's our primary source, right?
Yeah, that's our main source for today.
Yeah.
And it's really comprehensive. I mean, it's got it all. It's really a great starting point for our exploration.
Perfect. So let's start with Zhu Xi himself, right?
Yes.
Like his life, his influences. According to the source, he was a pretty remarkable kid asking big questions about the universe, like at 5 years old.
5 years old, yeah.
And understanding really complex text by the time he was, what, 8?
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, that early curiosity, that question, about what's beyond heaven, that suggests a mind that's just naturally drawn to these big philosophical questions.
Well,
right?
yeah.
And when you couple that with his early grasp of the classic of filiality, it points to an early engagement with both, metaphysical speculation and the core ethical and social principles of Confucianism.
Oh, okay.
It's almost like, these early interests foreshadow the comprehensive system he would later develop.
Yeah.
And then there's the influence of Mencius.
Yeah.
Mencius' idea that, anyone can become a sage.
Right.
That probably instilled in Zhu Xi this belief in the power of self-cultivation.
Oh.
Which we know is absolutely central to his philosophy.
Okay.
Right. So all these early threads are kind of coming together.
Yeah. And his education was fascinatingly diverse. His father, knowing he wasn't going to be around for long, he made sure that Zhu Xi had tutors from all sorts of different backgrounds, like not just Confucianism, but Taoism and Buddhism too.
Right. It's really quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean, that kind of exposure, that early on, really gave him this broad intellectual foundation, right? Exposed him to all these different perspectives on metaphysics, on ethics, on self-cultivation. So later on, when he's, bringing elements from Taoism and Buddhism into his own Neo-Confucian framework, you can really see the impact of this early exposure. And, the source even mentions that he formally studied Chan Buddhism.
Oh, wow.
And potentially had some connection to this master, Da Hui.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's even this subtle influence from the holistic thought of Huayan Buddhism. So, we're talking about real engagement here, not just some superficial familiarity.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then there's the fact that he passed that super difficult Jinshi exam at like 19, right?
Yeah, 19 years old.
Yeah.
And apparently he even used his knowledge of Chan Buddhism in his answers.
Really?
Yeah, which I think speaks to his, his intellectual agility.
Wow, okay.
But then about 10 years later, he meets Li Tong.
Okay.
And it seems like that was this pivotal moment that kind of steered him more definitively towards Neo-Confucianism.
Oh, okay. What was it about Li Tong's perspective that was so compelling to him?
Well, even though he had all this success early on and clearly had a very flexible mind, the source suggests that he might have been experiencing some spiritual doubts arising from all his diverse studies, And Li Tong, being a direct lineage holder of the Cheng brothers' Neo-Confucianism,
right,
really presented a compelling alternative, a coherent system. So it seems like Li Tong managed to articulate the cogency of the Confucian path, Confucian path in a way that resonated with Zhu Xi's needs at that time, both intellectually and spiritually.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting to note that his father had actually recommended Li Tong earlier.
Oh, really?
So there was probably already some existing respect for that particular lineage of Confucian thought.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then he chooses, despite this really tempting path of a government career, he kind of chooses to step aside and take these temple guardian posts.
Yeah.
Prioritizing study over, political engagement. What does that tell us about his philosophical priorities?
I think it speaks volumes about his deep commitment, to intellectual and philosophical pursuits.
Okay.
He deliberately chose a path that minimized, all those political entanglements.
Yeah.
So he could really have that space, that time for deep study to develop his own philosophical system.
Right.
And, his prolific output, all the stuff he wrote on classical studies, history, literature, and of course, philosophy.
Yeah.
That's a testament to that choice.
Right.
It suggests that he truly believed that his greatest contribution would be in the realm of ideas.
Okay. And it's interesting, right? Because he wasn't just some solitary thinker, like shut away in his study writing all this stuff.
No, not at all.
He was actually he was a teacher.
He was a highly influential teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his oral discourses, they were even preserved, right, in the classified dialogues of Master Zhu. And then his critical editions of those classic texts, particularly the 4 books, they became like, foundational works in their own right.
Yeah.
And they were used for centuries.
Oh, okay.
So how important do you think his role as a teacher was? I mean, do you think it had a big impact on the spread of his ideas?
Oh, I mean, it had to have, right?
It had to have, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. He wasn't just, coming up with these ideas on his own. He was attracting all these students, right?
Yeah.
And he was really meticulously preserving his teachings.
Okay.
So he was building a whole intellectual community, a community that was dedicated to exploring and propagating his vision of Neo-Confucianism.
Okay.
And his emphasis on the 4 books, right, elevating them to this almost canonical status.
Right.
That provided a structured curriculum, a curriculum for moral and intellectual development that shaped generations of scholars and officials.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and he also engaged with other texts as well,
Right.
like the songs of the South and even Dao's Cantonki.
Yeah, exactly. Which shows you that his intellectual curiosity didn't end with the Confucian canon.
Right.
He was always, looking for ways to broaden his understanding.
Okay.
And who knows? Maybe those other texts subtly influenced the way he interpreted the Confucian classics.
Right. It's all connected. And speaking of Confucianism, he spent his whole life trying to revitalize it, especially in response to the growing influence of Taoism and Buddhism.
Yeah, absolutely. He really believed that Confucianism was essential for China's cultural and political integrity.
Okay. So how did that sense of mission, this idea that he had to bring Confucianism back to the forefront, how did that shape his philosophical project?
Well, I think it was deeply intertwined, right?
Okay.
He really believed that a renewed, strong, Confucianism,
right, yeah,
grounded in a coherent metaphysical and ethical framework was the answer. It was the answer to the challenges of his time. Like what he saw as these barbarian encroachments.
Oh.
So his efforts to reestablish, to redefine, those fundamental Confucian concepts and values, they weren't just abstract academic exercises.
Right.
They were driven by this conviction that these ideas held the key to restoring order and harmony.
Oh.
Both to individuals, right, and to society as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, and it's fascinating how, he kind of saw it all as connected.
Right.
Like the individual and the cosmos society all kind of fitting together.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that sense of urgency, that sense that these ideas were relevant, were vital, were essential to address the problems of his day.
Yeah.
I think that really fueled the comprehensiveness and the systematicity of his thought.
Okay. Let's dig into some of the details now.
Yeah.
Starting with his ideas about human nature and self-cultivation. So his theory of Xing, it acknowledges both good and evil, right? Kind of like Mencius, who believed that humans are fundamentally good, but he also takes into account individual differences.
Yeah, so it's this interesting balance, right?
Right.
He follows Mencius, in asserting the inherent goodness of human nature.
Okay.
And he roots that goodness. He roots it in our shared endowment of lie. Yeah, which is, the principle.
Okay.
But he also recognizes that our physical embodiment, right, our our key endowment,
Okay.
our material constitution, our talents, our predispositions, that all varies, from person to person.
Oh, okay.
And that variation along with the influences of our environment, that can cloud our inherent goodness.
Okay.
It can lead to negative tendencies.
Okay, so it's like we all have the potential for good.
Yeah.
But it's not always, expressed or realized.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So while the potential for good is universal, the actualization of that potential, that's conditioned by the clarity and purity of our ki.
Okay.
And by the influences we're exposed to.
Okay. So, some people are just born with better ki.
Well, it's not necessarily about being better or worse, right?
Sure.
It's more about the specific characteristics of that ki.
Okay.
And how it interacts with the lie, with that underlying principle.
Okay. Yeah.
And, he's quite upfront about acknowledging that people can differ, in their moral inclinations right from the start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So even though he recognized those differences, right, he still believed that moral realization was possible for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. He was an optimist, when it came to human potential.
Okay.
But he also recognized that it takes, dedicated effort.
Right.
And when it comes to self-cultivation, he was critical of approaches that were too one-sided.
Oh, okay.
Right. Like his teacher Li Tan
Yeah.
and his friend Zheng Xi.
Yeah.
They advocated for stillness, right? Meditation for Li Tan.
Yeah.
And then activity, engagement with the world for Zhang Xi.
Right.
But Zhu Xi found both of those to be insufficient on their own.
Okay. What was his alternative?
Well, he thought that stillness without activity, that risks detaching you from the realities of ethical life.
Okay.
And then activity without stillness, that lacks the introspection, the self-reflection.
Yeah.
So his solution was this really interesting concept that he rediscovered from Zhu Dunyi.
Okay.
The interpenetration of stillness and activity.
Oh, okay.
It suggests that these two states, they're mutually exclusive for physical objects.
Okay.
But for the mind, for the spirit, they're actually mutually implicative.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's like this dynamic interplay between, contemplative reflection and active engagement in the world.
Okay. And that led him to develop his own approach.
Right.
The two-pronged approach.
Right.
Cultivating Jing, reverence, and then Gaiwu, investigating things to understand their patterns, the lie.
Yeah. Exactly. Two sides of the same coin, working together.
Okay. Let's break those down a little bit. Starting with Jing, reverence.
Okay. So Jing, originally it was associated with religious reverence, ancestor worship.
Okay.
But Zhu Xi, he broadens it, right?
Okay.
It becomes this state of focused attention, alertness, mindfulness, a seriousness of mind.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a deep respect
and
attentiveness to both yourself and the world.
Okay. And this helps to, purify our ki? Exactly.
It helps to purify our ki, letting that inherent goodness, that lie, shine through.
Okay.
So it's kind of creating that mental state that's conducive to discerning and acting in accordance with appropriateness.
Okay. Oh.
Which is yi and the mean zhongyang.
Okay.
So it's all connected.
Yeah, it is. And then the second part, Geiwu, the investigation of things.
Right. So Geiwu, this goes beyond just observation, right? Mm-hmm. It's about really grasping those fundamental those patterns that govern everything.
Okay. So how does that contribute to self-cultivation?
Well, Geiwu is all about rigorous inquiry.
Okay.
It's about systematically looking into the patterns and principles that structure reality.
So like nature, human relationships.
Exactly. Nature, society, human relationships, even the classics.
Oh, wow.
Everything. And by diligently investigating these you gain a deeper understanding of how things work.
Right.
And the ethical implications that are inherent in those patterns.
Okay.
So that intellectual understanding combined with the inner purification that you get from Jing,
right,
that equips you, right, to make more informed, more ethical decisions.
Okay, so it's kind of like, you're studying the rule book of the universe.
In a way, yeah.
And that helps you to play the game better.
Exactly. Grasping lie provides the cognitive framework for acting properly, for realizing those Confucian virtues.
Okay, that makes sense. But there's also this interesting mention of a shift in his thinking later on, right?
Yeah.
He started emphasizing this idea of establishing sincere determination, Lizzie, as like the very first step, the crucial first step in self-cultivation.
Right. So while Jing and Zhu remained important, Zhu Ji came to see that foundational commitment, that firm resolve to really embody those Confucian virtues, that was essential.
Okay.
It was the starting point.
Okay. Like you really have to want it.
Exactly. You have to want it. You have to have the sincere aspiration.
Right.
Otherwise, the Jing and the Gyuwu, they might lack, direction. They might not be truly motivated. So Lizzie, it's like the ethical compass.
Yeah.
It guides the whole process of self-cultivation.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. And speaking of ethics, his whole ethical philosophy, it seems to build on this idea of, this inherent capacity for good, this link to heaven as this moral force.
Yeah, absolutely. His ethics are deeply rooted in that classical Confucian idea.
Okay. Oh,
right. This idea that we all have this inherent capacity for goodness.
Okay.
And that's linked to heaven, as the ultimate source of moral order. Cheng Yi put it really well. He said, the original nature is just lie.
Oh, okay.
Right. So our shared human nature, it connects us to this universal principle of coherence.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that provides the metaphysical grounding, the grounding for ethical behavior.
Okay. And the source makes this interesting comparison between Zhu Ji and Levinas.
Oh, yeah. It's quite fascinating, right?
Through Argyrescu's work, right. Highlighting how they both kind of see ethical interrelatedness, but they come at it from different angles.
Yeah. So Argyrescu, he argues that Zhu Ji's concept of a shared lie, right, as the foundation of human nature.
Right.
It provides this unique perspective on ethical interrelatedness.
Okay.
And it contrasts with Levinas, who really emphasizes the radical alterity of the other.
Right.
Right. So for Zhu Ji, it's about this shared participation, in this principle of coherence that's bestowed by heaven.
Okay.
And that establishes a fundamental interconnectedness, right, that carries ethical implications. It's not about this face-to-face encounter, with this absolute transcendent other.
Right.
It's more about this transcendent attachment, this attachment that arises from our common origin.
Oh, wow.
And our shared potential to realize this inherent lie.
Okay.
Right. So it's an ethics that's grounded in shared human nature and in the cultivation of our innate moral capacity.
Okay. So given this, foundation, Zhu Ji really stresses this idea of Gewu Ziji, investigating things to attain knowledge, right?
Right.
To be able to discern what's right and act accordingly. He's not just saying, like, go with your gut,
No, definitely not.
Like, rely on your intuition.
Yeah, he believed that while, we do have this innate capacity for good to really understand how to act ethically, in those specific situations, we need careful observation, and analysis of the world around us. So Gewu Ziji.
Yeah.
It's the process of studying those patterns, the lie, that govern everything, our interactions, social structures, natural phenomena.
Okay.
And by understanding these patterns, we develop what he called ethical discernment, which is im.
Okay.
And that's what allows us to respond appropriately, which is yi,
right,
to all the complexities of life.
Okay.
He argued that just relying on moral intuition, that can lead to biases.
Yeah.
And you might miss those subtle moral considerations.
Right. Okay. So, Gewu here, it's not just some theoretical exercise.
No, it's very practical.
It's a way to refine your moral compass.
Yeah, exactly.
By actually engaging with the world.
Yeah, and he was really grappling with these two big problems, the conditions for moral agency, right, and the whole program of self-cultivation. How do we actually become better people?
Okay.
So how do you think Jiwu fits into both of those?
Well, I guess by understanding the lies of ethical conduct, right?
Yeah.
You develop this clarity.
Yeah.
You can make better moral judgment.
Exactly. And that understanding,
right,
combined with the inner discipline from Xing and that resolute commitment, that Lizzie we talked about,
right,
it strengthens your moral will.
Right.
You're actually able to act on what you know to be right.
Right. He doesn't just stop there, though. He also recognizes that, sometimes you can't just rigidly follow the rules.
Right. You can't be a stickler for the rules all the time.
Yeah.
He advocates for this sympathetic understanding of daily life.
Yeah.
Informed by ideals like Ren and Gong.
Okay.
Humaneness, fairness. He knew that rules They don't always fit the messiness of real life.
Yeah, and this is where his critique of moral intuitionism really comes into play.
Right.
Like he's saying, look, you can't just rely on your gut feelings all the time.
Exactly. Exactly. He saw moral intuition as potentially unreliable,
right.
as lacking that rigor that you need to navigate those complex ethical decisions.
Yeah.
Yep. So instead, he emphasizes studying the lie.
Yeah.
Studying the lie of how things actually work. The patterns of interactions, the consequences of actions, the dynamics of relationships.
So he's saying pay attention to the world.
Pay attention.
Really observe what's going on.
Yeah, he was all about observation and analysis.
Okay. And that leads us to his conception of the world, right? This idea of the world as this pattern totality made of lie and key.
Yeah, this is fundamental to his whole philosophical framework.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. What's going on with the lie and the key?
Okay, so he envisions the cosmos, right, as this dynamic, interconnected reality that's composed of these two fundamental aspects, lie and key. Okay. Right. Lie provides the structure, the inherent organizing principles that make things what they are.
Okay.
And they govern their interactions. And then key it's the material substrate, the stuff through which those principles manifest.
Okay. So it's like lie is the blueprint and key is the building material.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. From the most primordial yuanqi.
Okay.
To the interplay of yin and yang, the 5 phases, wuxing, the taiji, the supreme polarity, and all the phenomena, all the stuff we see in the world.
Yeah.
It's all understood as this complex interplay between lie and key.
Okay. And these principles, they're not like, floating out there somewhere in some abstract realm.
No, not at all.
They're imminent, right?
They're imminent, yeah. They're right here in the world.
Okay. And he uses these really cool metaphors like wood grain, jade lines to kind of illustrate this.
Yeah, those metaphors, they really capture the idea that lie aren't separate from the concrete world.
Right.
But rather, they're the inherent patterns, the structures that we can see within it.
Oh.
They're the reason why things are the way they are.
Okay.
However, the way those lie manifest, that's always conditioned by the specific characteristics of the key.
Oh, okay.
Right. So coarser key, it might obscure the lie. It might lead to imperfections, deviations from the ideal pattern.
Okay. So like a flawed piece of jade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The lines might not be as clear as perfect.
Yeah.
But the underlying pattern is still there.
Okay. And these lie, right, they don't just structure the external world, they structure our minds too.
Yeah. Our minds, our thoughts, our language, it's all interconnected.
Yeah, right.
So the same fundamental principles that govern the cosmos, they also structure the human mind.
Okay. So that means like objective learning and self-understanding, they're kind of linked?
Absolutely. So when we're investigating those external lies, when we're learning about the world,
right,
we're also, in a way, learning about ourselves.
Okay.
Right? We're realizing the lie within our own being. And, lie also shapes those inherent tendencies we have. Our ixing and how our impulses lead to emotions are king, and our responses, gannying.
Oh, wow.
So self-cultivation then becomes, in part, this process of aligning our key and our understanding with those inherent lies.
Oh, okay. So it's about becoming more in tune with the patterns of the universe.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about harmonizing ourselves, with the way.
Okay. Now, what about those situations where the ethical norms, they don't quite seem to apply, like those gray areas? He introduced this concept of quan.
Yeah, quan, discretion, weighing up the circumstances, is a really important concept for navigating those ethical ambiguities.
Okay.
Because he recognized that rigidly sticking to the rules all the time, sometimes it can lead to negative consequences.
Right.
You have to be able to adapt. So quan allows for that flexibility, that context-sensitive application of ethical understanding.
Okay. So give me some examples of when you might use quan.
Okay. So imagine you're dealing with a ruler, an authority figure who's evil.
Oh, wow.
Right. Or maybe there's some urgent need, like your sister-in-law is drowning.
Right.
Or you need to act according to a higher principle, like humaneness. Even if it means bending a ritual prescription.
Okay.
These are all situations where you might need to exercise quan.
Right. Okay. But this doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's not a free-for-all.
Right.
Zushi was very clear about that. He said the use of quan cannot be ethically reprehensible in itself.
Okay.
And it must ultimately serve to uphold the way.
Okay.
Right? So it's not about just throwing out the rules altogether.
Right.
You still have to be guided by those core moral values, and you have to consider all the factors, all the relevant factors.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And he also said that the person who's exercising Quan should have, a good moral character.
Yeah. It should have well-established moral probity
Right.
and a thorough understanding of the situation.
Right. And that comes from all the Jiwu.
Exactly. From all the Jiwu and from self-cultivation.
Okay.
So it's a safeguard, right? A safeguard against just, arbitrarily deciding to do whatever you want.
Right. This whole idea reminds me of that analogy of Cook Ding from the Zhuangzi.
Yeah.
The butcher who's so skilled he can carve up an ox without even touching the bones.
Ah, yes. Cook Ding. That's a great analogy. It really illustrates that cultivated sense of appropriateness,
Right.
that underlies the proper application of Quan. It's mastery, It goes beyond just following the rules.
Yeah, and Zhuangzi talks about it as this kind of intuitive resolution.
Right.
Zushi, I think. Yeah.